spiky neural networks. So today's presentation or today's tutorial, I will try to give the concepts before building a neural network and spiky neural network, and how we can perform some classification problems. They can also be used for prediction, but in this occasion, we only talk about classification problems. So yeah, there are many theory, a lot of theory, but at the end, I will present two architectures that I have been working with and to solve some classification problems. One of the examples that I will present is using EEG data. EEG data is temporal, spatial and temporal data. So I hope you can have an idea on how to apply these spiky neural networks with temporal data and spatial and temporal data. Okay. Maybe we can have, because it's a lot of theory, maybe we can have some breaks, probably every hour. And during this tutorial, I wanted to be like more a discussion. So if you have any question or comment, please just raise your hand at any time, and I will be glad to discuss and try to solve your questions or comments. Well, yes, I will start giving the presentation. I will share my screen. So can you confirm that I am sharing my screen?
Yes, you are sharing your screen, and it's
okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Yes. The title of this tutorial is "Spiky Neural Networks: A Practical Approach for Spatio-temporal Data Classification." So usually, artificial neural networks are used for solving classification or prediction problems. And most of the cases, what we use is static data, or what we call static data, that describes the features of those, for example, of the data. No? For example, the classical one, or the most usual one, is the iris data set, that shows 4 features of this plant, the iris plant. So, and then we just try to do some to solve this 3 problem class using artificial neural networks. But recently, or in the last decade, we have been produced a lot of data, but from sensor networks. For example, from in this case EEG data. We have from I don't know, a seismic network. So we have a lot of temporal and spatial and temporal data, and there are just few techniques that we can use using artificial intelligence for solving this kind of problems. So one of the techniques that we are proposing is to use spiky neural networks, and this is a research field, so I cannot say that we can still we can be comparable to artificial neural networks, but I will show you how it works and how yes, and also the benefits of using them and how we can try use temporal information. Okay, so at the end of this tutorial, we will be able to understand diverse concepts related to spiky neural networks. And the second is that we will create a model for spatio-temporal data classification. The first part that is just showing a lot of theory is because I will show 2 architectures of spiky neural networks. The first one is using only one spiking neuron, and we will solve a classification problem using only one neuron. So you can see the power of only one neuron of this third generation of neural networks. So, and the second architecture that I will show is the one that we are working in at KEDRI. The name is NewQ, and all these concepts is to present the NewQ. So NewQ, there are several papers related to NewQ, but sometimes it's a little bit complicated to understand how the NewQ works. So all these concepts that I will present are related to the NewQ. Okay, so the tutorial will be, or the tutorial I will present these topics. The first one is the generation of neural network models. We will show, or I will show you the difference between the first, second, and third generation of neural networks. The second topic is spike coding. So this is an important topic because because it's one of the features that we can use to extract some information from a neural network or spiking neural network. The third is spiking neural models. So there are several mathematical models that represent a spiking neuron. I will show you, I would say, the most relevant and the most common use here in classification or in artificial intelligence. And the fourth one is encoding algorithms. So because spiking neurons communicate with other units using spike trains or spike, so some architectures need to encode the data. So for example, we have I don't know, a signal, so a raw signal, so we have to transform that signal into sequences of spikes, so we can pass it through the spiking neural network. The sixth one is learning algorithms. So regarding spiking neural networks, that is one of the problems. There are not specific learning algorithms that, for example, in artificial neural networks, the most common, or one of the that is well known, is the backpropagation. So, but because of the features of spiking neurons, we cannot implement those kind of learning. So, learning algorithms are a bit controversial for this type of artificial neural networks. And I will show you two learning algorithms that are useful for the NewQ. Also, we can use evolutionary computation. After that, I will present the two architectures, and at the end, I will describe one of the problems with these spiking neural networks, that is the hyperparameter optimization. So please, if you have any question, just raise your hand and I will be glad to answer it. Okay, the generations of neural networks. So we have the first generation. It's important to mention that this classification is regarding the computational units, not the architecture as it. So for example, in the first generation, we have the perceptron or threshold gates. These kind of units can just process digital input and digital output. So it's a simple perceptron. So the computational unit is just a simple line. So as an example, we have the Huxley field. So this is like the most basic concept of artificial neural networks. The second generation is a little bit more complicated. Here we are just presenting, we can I would say the activation function is more complicated. So we use we can use a sigmoid signal or a linear saturate function, and with this function we can compute analog input and analog output. Examples of this second generation are the recurrent neural network, for example, or a feed-forward neural network. So I I won't explain much about artificial neural networks, so it's not the point of this tutorial. The point is about spiking neural networks. So what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily that you completely understand first and second generation of artificial neural networks. The third generation spiking neural networks is just a little bit different paradigm. So it's not necessarily to understand artificial neural networks. But what it is important is to understand how spiking neural networks work. So the third generation, that is the spiking neurons, are mathematical models that describe the behavior of a biological neuron. So we have a lot of mathematical models that can describe this, the behavior of neurons. But what we use here for solving this classification or prediction problems, we just need some models that can represent the membrane potential of the neuron. What is the membrane potential? The voltage of a neuron. Okay, so on your right, you can see two diagrams. The first diagram on the top is like the structure of a neuron. So you can see that is the some, or the core of the neuron. We have the dendrites and the axon. The dendrites allows to communicate or to pass other neurons, pass information to this neuron. The axon is the part of the neuron that propagates the information. We propagate information through spikes or spike trains. So basically, spiking neurons, or the biological neurons, works or are stimulated with input currents, right? Input currents that are signals coming from other neurons, and they started accumulating some, let's see, voltage. And once the voltage surpasses a threshold, so they will emit a spike. I will explain it later with more detail. But usually, the neurons in the brain, or any kind of neuron or nerve cell, so they have some threshold values that goes from minus 80 millivolts to minus 40 millivolts. So when they are not stimulated, this is the voltage that they have. When they surpasses this threshold, they will emit a spike. I'm not sure, but okay. For example, here we see in the image on the right and on the bottom. So we see how the signal is passing from the neuron that is in red to the neuron in green. So with every signal, it starts accumulating some energy. And when that energy is too much, so just the neuron will release another spike. So this third generation of neural networks can compute not only digital inputs and outputs, or analog inputs and outputs, but also they can compute time. So that is the advantage of this third generation. So as I was saying at the beginning, most of the classification problems just deal with the features of the samples of the data. But nowadays we have a lot of information, temporal information, and we don't have those kind of techniques well developed. So one of the techniques that we can use is this third generation, or the spiking neurons, because they can compute time. Practically, they are differential equations or systems of differential equations. They are more powerful than first and second generation of neural networks, and I can say that a single neuron can solve linearly and non-linearly separable problems. That is one of the things that units from the first and second generation cannot do. So we need more than one neuron to solve non-linearly separable problems, but it is possible with spiking neurons. There are more, there are books about the third generation of neural networks, and one of the best one, or the one that I recommend, is this book, Networks of Spiky Neurons, so it's in the references, Networks of Spiky Neurons, the third generation of neural network models. So they explain in this book, you will find all the theory behind the third generation of neural networks. It's quite interesting book. So yeah, as I was saying, spiky neurons are inspired by information processing in biology, like the real neurons work. But one of the advantages of spiky neural networks is that they can work in neuromorphic hardware. The neuromorphic hardware are specialized hardware that can simulate these neurons, right? So the advantage of using neuromorphic hardware is that it's a very low power consumption because they only need to process information when they receive a spike. So most of the time they are, let's say, they are off. And when they receive a signal, they just will compute that signal in that moment. And well, there are not more power consumption. They are fast and they are event-driven information processing. So that is something that is hard to manage when we are using artificial networks of the first and second generation, right? Event-driven. So in this context, we can say that the spiky neural networks are interesting candidates for an efficient implementation of deep neural networks. I will explain when I'm talking about the new tube, so I will explain how spiky neural networks, or the architecture that I will show, is comparable to deep neural networks. And yeah, and also it offers great opportunities to work with new types of event-based sensors, exploit temporal codes, and look at on-chip learning. So practically, these are the advantages of using spiky neural networks. One important thing to understand is that, yeah, how we can extract information from spiky neurons. And as I was saying, spiky neurons, or as we know, neurons in the brain communicate through sequences of spike. So we just send information to other neurons by spikes, by events. So it is important to understand the information between these spikes. So in this diagram, what I want to show you is how I conceptualize like how two neurons communicate their information. And if you can see on the left side, we have the blue spheres. They represent presynaptic neurons. On the right, we have the postsynaptic neurons. So in between, there are the connections, the weights, the synapses, right? So as I can see them is like switches. So when a neuron, a presynaptic neuron, the one that is in the left, want to transmit information to the other neuron, so it's like closing the switch or doing the switch on, right? And at that moment, so that neuron will send a spike to the postsynaptic neuron. So let's start doing explain with more detail with this image. On the top, so we have remember that we are working with time, right? So let's see that we have a specific time. In this case, is time 11. So we have a simulation time. So it can be 1 second, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 1 hour. It doesn't matter. So it's just to exemplify the communication between two spiky neurons. So let's see that we have a specific time. In this case, time equals to 11. And we see that the spiky neuron on the left, or the neuron on the left, so has no information at all. But on the right, the postsynaptic neuron have two curves. These curves represent the voltage, the internal voltage of this postsynaptic neuron, the one in yellow. So why is this voltage? Maybe because that other neuron is being stimulated with other neurons. So it's more complicated if I show this example with more neurons. So is with two neurons is enough. So in the middle, we have like the presynaptic neuron is emitting a spike. So it was stimulated previously, so now it accumulates enough energy that can start sending spikes to the postsynaptic neuron. So the signal in red in the middle so means that the presynaptic neuron in blue is emitting a spike at time 12. So nothing happened to the neuron to the postsynaptic neuron at that time. So the voltage, the internal voltage of that neuron is still the same, but after one time unit, so at time 13, for example, we can see that the neuron, now the neuron in red, so increases the voltage of the internal voltage, that is the signal in red. So as you can see, at this time, we have a horizontal line that represents the threshold of that postsynaptic neuron, the neuron in red. So that means that the voltage accumulated or passes that threshold, then the neuron in red can emit a spike, right? So this is the way how two neurons communicate information. We have a presynaptic neuron that is not emitting anything, so there is nothing happening on the postsynaptic neuron, but when the presynaptic neurons have enough energy and it releases that energy as a spike, then the neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, receives that spike and increments its internal voltage. So if that postsynaptic neuron, or if the voltage of that postsynaptic neuron reaches a specific threshold, so it will emit a spike. So this example happens with all the neurons in biology. So, and also is the same concept that we will follow here with classification and prediction problems. Okay, I have a question. How are these neurons connected within the network? So I can say that the connection, I will explain with more detail when I'm talking about the new tube, but the network is connected in a similar way that we use in artificial neural networks of the first and second generation. We call that, well, in the synapses, right? So we create some weights. So it's the same here in the spiky neural networks. We have synapses, we have weights. If we want to talk about a mathematical thing, so we have a matrix, a connection matrix that we have the rows that are the number of neurons and the columns that are the same number of neurons, and every coordinate represents the connection between one another neuron. So this is the way we connect. I mean, it's just to make a relationship between the pre and postsynaptic neuron with a number. The number means the weight, right? So it's exactly the same as artificial neural network. I don't know if I solve the question, but I think I can explain it later when I am showing the two architectures, the single neuron, that is not much connectivity, but with the new tube, there's some specific algorithms to perform some connections. But basically, we can talk about a matrix, and that matrix represents the relationships between two units. No. Now I'm not. I will not talk about architecture, but or go deep into architecture. But spiky neural networks have the similar structure as first and second generation. So we have a layer of input neurons or input nodes that have the information. Those input nodes propagate the information through the hidden layer. This hidden layer can be or can be several layers, can be only one layer, but could be recurrent, can be just feed forward. Yeah, I mean, we have any similar to the first and second generation. And also at the end, we have an output layer. So it has exactly the same components as artificial neural networks. It's just a paradigm of how we transfer information between these units. And the way we transfer information between units is represented by this picture. Okay, thank you. Okay, say that I answered the question. Yes, but we can. I will talk about more about that later. So as well, I was saying, what are the features that we can extract from spikes? So if you could see, there is. I'm not talking about numbers. I'm not saying, okay, the presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron send, I don't know, that amount of energy. No. With spiky neurons, we just send ones and zeros. I mean, we don't send zero, just one. So if the new presynaptic neuron spike, so we send, let's say, one to the other. We send an event. We don't send number. So now it's difficult to extract some information from that simple process. So, but it is important because we can use that coding in the spike train to perform some classification problems. So we have two approaches for spike coding. The first one is rate code, and the second one is spike code. So when we are talking about rate codes, there are three. I mean, these are the three simplest approaches. One, or the first one, is the rate as spike count. So we have a spike train, I mean, a sequence of spikes transmitted from presynaptic neurons to postsynaptic neurons. And what we can do is just count the number of spikes in an interval of time. So, and just to calculate how many, the number of spikes I mean, that neuron propagates to that postsynaptic neuron. It's just an average. So that is the simplest code that we can use. The second one is related to the spike density. So in some way, we can count the number or the amount of spikes in an interval, but when that input is, or when one, I mean, it follows with another external signal that here in the diagram on the right and top right. So we can say that is an input. So we have three units, spiky neurons, that are emitting some spikes, but they are also working with an external input signal. So what we want to extract from this information is the amount of spikes that this group of neurons are emitting from to the postsynaptic neuron do while this signal is on. No, when we are, yeah, in this case, it means a digital one. That is another kind of information that we can extract, like the amount of energy propagated from a group of neurons. And the third one is the rate as population activity. So what we can encode here is that we have several group of neurons spiking at different times, and we can, let's say, we can synchronize them. So we can detect the number of spikes that all the neurons emit in an interval of time, or in a window, right? So if that amount, let's say, let's do like a voting scheme. So we have 3 neurons, and okay, in the diagram we have 4 neurons, and we can see that there are 2 vertical lines that are delimiting the window that we want to process. So in this part, we have 3 neurons that spike in that window. So let's see that will represent a 1. Why? Because 3 of them, 3 from 4, are spiking. If just one of them was spiking, so we cannot encode it into 1. So it's like a voting scheme. These 2, the rate as spike count and the rate as population activity, we will use it when I am presenting the single neuron architecture for classification, right? So it's very, very simple way to understand or to extract information from spiking activity or from spike trains. The second approach is spike codes, and they are also very useful. I will present 3 of them, but most of the research uses the time to the first spike. Okay, the first one is time to the first spike. So when we have a set of neurons that are spiking at different time, what we will consider here is the neuron that fire first when they are stimulated. So we see that with the dot line is the stimulus of the, we are sending a signal to these neurons. And when we are sending this signal, only 3 neurons fired. So what we will consider here is the neuron, the third neuron from the top to the bottom, because that fire first. So if we are talking, if we are working with a multi-layer spiking neural network, so maybe in the output, at the output we have several units, several neurons. So, and we want to start classifying some patterns. So maybe we can say that a specific neuron will send a spike or will emit a spike if the pattern agrees with one of the conditions that we desire. So instead of having all the neurons, maybe all the other neurons can spike, but we just consider the first one, the first that spike. So we use this time to first spike in one of the learning algorithms that we use in the NICU. So yeah, and many literature refers to the time to first spike as important encoding algorithm, or coding, coding spike. And the second one is phase. So it's not very useful, at least not with classification or prediction problems. So here we have oscillation signal, or a signal that is oscillating, sorry. And then we can detect the number of spikes or the neurons that spike in an interval, no, from of the signal. So in this case, let's see if we are working with a signal. So only after one period we can detect the number of spikes. This is not very useful, at least, or we haven't seen it much in classification or prediction problems. The other one is the synchrony, and this is also useful. And it's similar to the voting scheme. So we will consider, when we have a group of spiking neurons, we will consider those neurons that spike in, let's say, in the same interval of time. right? So as we can see in the scheme, we have three neurons, always three neurons that are firing in a similar at similar intervals. So we can encode, or we can use them as to classify I don't know, a pattern. So when instead of using only one neuron, we can use 3, 4, or n neurons that spike almost at the same time. And if those neurons, I mean, the same neurons spike at the same time, so we can consider as a pattern. So we can have different groups of neurons spiking at different times, but they are always in the similar interval, so we can detect patterns, right? So as I was saying, we use the time to first spike in the new queue, but also we can use the synchronous in the new queue. Any questions so far? And before continuing with the concept of spiking neuron. So please, if you have, maybe these concepts are not just theoretical, and so far we don't see much application. But when I start explaining the new queue or the other architecture of the single neuron, you will realize how this coding information is useful. Okay, well, okay, I have no more questions so far. So the next topic is related to spiking neurons. I think I'm going a little bit fast, but maybe I can spend more time solving some questions while I am explaining the architectures. But okay, so the next topic is spiking neuron models. So similar to the second generation that we have different activation functions. So with the spiking neuron model, we have different models that simulates the behavior of our biological neuron. And the most important part, as I said, is the how we model the membrane potential or the voltage of a neuron. So I will present 4 models. The first one is the leak, integrate, and fire model. It's one of the simplest spiking neuron models. The second one is the Huxley model. This is the most biologically plausible model, but also is the most complicated model. So we usually don't use this one for doing classification or for doing prediction problems, right? Because it's complicated and it takes several floating points operations. The third one that we have is the Isaacevich model. So this is one of the most useful models also in neuroscience, not only in artificial intelligence, but also in neuroscience, because it combines two things, that is biologically plausible, but also is a simple model that can be used for fast computations. And the fourth one is the adaptive exponential integrate and fire model, or the ADEX model, that is the leak, integrate, and fire model, but with an adaptive threshold. So this model is also can be used for classification and prediction problems, because it doesn't use many floating points, and also it's biologically plausible, or it has some characteristics that are similar to real neurons. So the first one is the leak, integrate, and fire model. So this model was invented in the 30s. So actually, it's complicated to say when it was invented, because it suffers a lot of transformations since the beginning of the last century. So, but the real name as leak, integrate, and fire model was given in I think in 1936. So, and all these models have been used in neuroscience just recently. I would say in the last 20 years, scientists started using these models or these mathematical models in artificial intelligence. But before they were used in neuroscience, they wanted to understand how the neurons work, how the neurons process information, to understand the brain, right, or some organism. So that was the first intention of the spiky neural networks. No? Now we are using as a powerful artificial intelligence machine. So this leak, integrate, and fire model describes a simple resistor capacitor circuit, and where the leakage term is due to the resistor, and the integration of the current at time t is due to the capacitor that is in parallel to the, oh my God, it's in parallel to the resistance, right? I just have an error here in my presentation. Anyway, so as you can see, it's a differential equation of first order, and we have on the right side the membrane time constant that's multiplied by the derivative of the voltage with respect of time, and this is equals to the voltage, a negative voltage, plus the resistance multiplied by the input current. So this is a simple resistor capacitor equation. This leak, integrate, and fire model does not have, or does not, does not really emit spike, or doesn't have that that part. So what we do is to simulate spike. So when the voltage of that neuron reaches a specific threshold value, then we will say that that neuron emits a spike, and immediately we will reset the voltage to a reset voltage or to a steady state voltage. So in leak, integrate, and fire models, usually we have that the resting voltage is 0, and the threshold depends on the application, goes from 0.5 to 1 or any number, right? So it's very simple model, and yeah, it's very fast, but I would say that is not, if you are trying to extract some biological information, so it's not a good one because it's not biologically plausible. It cannot exhibit the or many features of real neurons. The second one is the Huxley model. Actually, Hughkin and Huxley won a Nobel Prize because of this model. They tried to understand, and they created a model of the nerve of a squid, a giant squid. So, and yeah, they created a very detailed model where the ions of calcium, potassium, and sodium are modeled, and how they interact with the to stimulate this nerve cell of the giant squid. So as you can see, it's a complex system of differential equations. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 differential equations that create the or simulates the dynamics of these of real nerves or real cells or nerve cells. So yeah, I would say that is the most biologically plausible model, but it's not possible to implement it in I would say in artificial intelligence it requires a lot of computation, a lot of calculations. So when you have, let's see, a neural network with thousands of neurons, so making these calculations is um, permissible, right? It will take long time. Well, one of the advantages of the spiking neurons is to make it faster. They can work in parallel, but if just to calculate the dynamics of only one neuron is take long time. So calculation of thousands of neurons is not possible. So yeah, this model is used most of the times in neuroscience. Mhm. So we have the next one, that is the Isaac model. So this Isaac model is a two differential equation system, and this model can reproduce 20 computational properties of cortical neurons. So yeah, the equations that describes the behavior of this neuron involves two main variables. The one that simulates the membrane potential, that is given by variable b, and the second one is the variable u that represents the recovery variable, and that recovery variable gives feedback to the membrane potential. So I would say that when the voltage of that neuron is increasing, we should have something that maintains that voltage close to the resting membrane potential. So it's like a force that do not allow the voltage to increase fast. So these two variables work together. Similar to the other neurons, this Isaac model also has a threshold value. Usually the threshold value in this model goes from minus 50 to 40 or minus 40 millivolts. But in the model, we have a condition. So this condition means that if the voltage surpasses the threshold value, then the voltage will be reset to a specific value, and also the recovery value will be reset to another specific value. So, but that doesn't mean that is the threshold voltage of the neuron. This condition is just to make a beautiful shape of this cleavage model. So usually you can see if you read the papers, actually I have two papers, that's two important papers that describe this model. The one is the simple model of spiking neurons. In that paper, you can find the original equation and the properties of this model. There you can find that the voltage or the threshold goes from minus 50 to minus 40 millivolts. So, and this threshold that we are defining in this model is just to make a beautiful plot, I would say. So, because once the neurons reaches that threshold, it's like if they have a short circuit, no? They just explode, and the values of the voltage can go to the infinite. So it's important to have an idea or to limit that voltage. So usually we use this condition to have a specific threshold, no, a specific voltage, sorry. And the second paper, that is a which model to use for cortical spiking neurons. There, Isaac describe several properties of this model, the 20 computational properties of this model. He also made a comparison between different models. Among them is the Huxley, the adaptive integrator model, and also the leak integrator model. So you will see, you can see in detail So actually, these are the 20 neurocomputational properties of biological neurons. So let me go back. So as you can see, this model has four variables, A, B, C, and D. And the values of this value, or depending on the values of these variables, we can have different behaviors. So these are the 20 computational properties of biological neurons. Some of them exhibit like, so in the brain, or in general, generally speaking, we have two types of neurons. We have excitatory and inhibitory neurons. So excitatory neurons, what they do is a presynaptic excitatory neuron will cause the postsynaptic neuron increase the voltage, right? In simple words, it's like that. And we have inhibitory neurons that do the opposite. So when a presynaptic neuron that is inhibitory sends a spike to a postsynaptic neuron, what it makes is to reduce the voltage of that postsynaptic neuron. So some of these behaviors are related to these excitatory and inhibitory neurons. This is important concept. I'm talking about excitation and inhibition because we'll talk about this later when I am presenting the new cube. We can have excitatory and inhibitory connections that are important to regulate the activity of the neural network. So let me put an example. Let's see that we have a set group of neurons, and all of them are excitatory neurons, and they started sending information to, let's say we have two layers of neurons. One layer is excitatory, that is sending signals to this second layer, and they are only excitatory neurons. So when they start firing, so that amount of energy will be accumulated to the output neuron, to the second layer. So if we constantly emit excitatory neurons, emit spikes from these excitatory neurons to the postsynaptic neurons, that means that the postsynaptic neurons will start accumulating a lot of information, a lot of energy constantly. So when they start receiving a lot of energy, obviously they will start firing also faster. And there will be a point that they have that much energy that they will start firing at every time step, let's see. And if they fire at every time step, so you will see that there is not a spiking patterns. So the coding, the way to code that information will be impossible, right? Because we don't have like this space between two spikes. So we cannot do a rate encoding. We cannot detect the first of the spike, the time of the first spike. We cannot do even an average of the spiking activity because there are not such a pattern. So it's always firing. So this concept of excitatory and inhibitory neurons is important, and I will explain it later. The fourth model is the adaptive exponential integrator amplifier model. So this is, along with the Excitatory model, this is a biologically plausible and very fast computation model. So we can use these two models and to solve some classification and prediction problems, but also to understand some properties of real neurons. Okay, so here is also two differential equations system. And similar to the Excitatory, if we surpass a threshold value, then we will emit a spike, and immediately it will we have to reset the voltage to the initial state. Okay, so a good, very good paper related to adaptive exponential integrator amplifier model can be found in Scholarpedia. Scholarpedia is a web page supported by Eugene Isaacevich. So everything related to spiking neurons, not only, well, most of the topics are related to neuroscience. You can find it in this webpage, the Scholarpedia. And a good article is the Adaptive Exponential Integrated Amplifier Model, where this model is described all the properties, all the dynamics, and how you can use it in neuroscience. And you can take some ideas on how to use it for artificial intelligence. So here is a table that shows a comparison between different models. This table and this diagram is taken from this paper, which model to use for cortical spiking neurons, where Isaacevich do a comparison between all these models. And yeah, you can see all the features. Actually, the 20 behaviors or 20 computational properties of biological neurons, and if the models meet with those properties or not. At the end of the table, on the right side, the last column indicates the number of floating point operations that every model uses. So as you can see, the fastest one is the integrator amplifier model with only 5 floating points. So maybe this model is good to perform some classification problems. But if you want to do some analysis regarding some biological properties, it's not recommended to use this one. However, we have on the other side, we have the Huxley that, as you can see, is 1,200 floating points. So that is not permissible when we are doing fast computations. So maybe the Isaacevich model that uses 13 could be a good model, or actually is a good model. Resonate amplifier or quadratic integrated amplifier models, they are also good. But the problem with these two other models is that they don't exhibit a complete range of biological behavior. On the right side, we have a scheme when we can see the efficiency biological plausibility of the neurons. So as you can see, the integrated amplifier model is very efficient, but is poor in talking about plausibility. And also the Huxley is in the extreme, is the most accurate model, but the efficiency is not much. Something in between is the Isaacevich model. So yeah, these are the news that you can consider to implement in spiking neural network. So I think before continue, we will take a break of maybe 5 minutes, so we can just rest or try to digest all this information. You have any question during this time, so I'm happy to answer. And yeah, I will see you, please, in 5 minutes. Ok. Es complicado utilizar el Zoom.
Te veo cambiando, tienes 2 pantallas, ¿no?
Sí, es que en una estoy viendo si hay
Preguntas.
preguntas. Solamente una persona ha enviado preguntas. No me gusta cuando no hacen preguntas. Porque supongo que no están entendiendo nada.
Pero tienes 80 participantes. Ahorita les preguntas otra vez después del break. Ok. No, ha sido muy intuitiva, muy descriptiva la plática. Yo creo que sí están. Es que es complicado la interacción. O sea,
Ya. Cuando hay visitantes en Kedri, pues muchos llegan porque leyeron el paper y YouTube y ya.
Mira, ya te están contestando, que sí ha sido muy claro.
Okay, gracias.
Acaba de compartir, tienes 8 están siguiendo la transmisión en YouTube. Y 14 en Facebook.
Ok.
¿Va? Más 80 de aquí, ya tienes 100.
Bueno, lo mismo, sí. Pero capturando la idea.
Es parte de la difusión de nuevas técnicas.
Sí, muchos de estos conceptos pues no se entienden al principio. Más bien, no es que no se entiendan, sino la utilidad, ¿no? ¿Por qué hablar de la codificación? Vamos, es otro paradigma. Eso a lo que yo me he enfrentado.
Sí, no, cambiar de paradigma. Cuando llevas más de 50 años con redes tradicionales y meter este tipo de técnicas, pues sí, es un gran reto. Primero para sensibilizar a lo tradicional, ¿no? Quizá con los que apenas están iniciando. Cuando tú dijiste, no es necesario que sepas redes neuronales para entender esto, creo que ahí es donde muchos pueden aprender este tipo de técnicas sin pasar por esta primera y segunda generación. Mira, te pregunta otro participante, Diana.
No, ya. Estaremos viendo
Diana
aplicaciones.
Jiménez y Luis Canales. Si te parece, ahorita que iniciemos la transmisión, las contestas para que queden grabadas.
Por supuesto.
La grabación ya empezó nuevamente y creo que ya pasaron ya pasó el coffee break.
Ok. Entonces ya comparto mi Okay, guys, so we will continue with our presentation that I would like to be more interactive, more like a discussion. So we have 2 questions. One of the questions is, oh my God, is that we will see some applications with using this technology in the future. So yes, we will see. I think, we will see this spiking neural networks implemented for real world to solve real world problems in the near future. Actually, there are hardware and big companies working on hardware. So we already have the hardware, but we don't have the software. So we have the hardware, for example, IBM. IBM created the True North. Yeah, I think that is a circuit of neuromorphic hardware. Also, the University of Manchester, they have a cluster of neuromorphic hardware. Actually, that neuromorphic hardware is called Spinnaker. And yeah, you can find it in the University of Manchester web page. And yeah, we are doing research on that specifically to do this kind of applications. Um, I mean, I can say in my research, I have implemented these neurons, these neural networks to solve some classification problems. For example, for prosthetics, like trying to recognize the movements of fingers. And well, if you do some comparisons between these artificial neural networks and the first and the second generation, so they are more accurate. Why is that? Because they can process temporal information. The temporal information I'm talking about signals. It's not only static features, but signals. And yeah, I believe that in the near future we will see this kind of hardware with this software implemented. So as I described before, is event drive based technology. So it allows parallel computations and very fast computations. The consumption of energy is very efficient because the circuits can only be on once they receive an impulse of information, right? So definitely we will have this technology in the future. We are doing a lot of research, not only in my lab, but in Europe there are many research labs that are working on that. So as I mentioned, the University of Manchester, they already have developed this neuromorphic hardware. And yeah, China has a lot of papers regarding spiky neural networks. Another question is if the workshops will be transmitted also in Facebook. I think so, is what Roberta said at the beginning of the tutorial. So yeah, and actually we are having people connected in Facebook. Okay, some greetings from Chihuahua, Juarez. All activities will be recorded and will be available. Yeah. So I'm just reading the questions, so I can answer them. Okay. So here makes what's the difference between a classical neural network-oriented hardware architecture and neuromorphic architecture? So I think, as I described at the beginning, and when I was describing how the neurons communicate or transmit information to each other, so it's just a switch, right? So if that computational unit emits information, emits a spike, and send this spike to another neuron, it will only activate a switch. So as you can see, it's very efficient way to propagate information. So the circuit cannot be enabled at all time, right? So that is one of the advantages or differences between neural network-oriented hardware and the neuromorphic architecture. So the power consumption efficiency. So it's like switching just on and off. You don't need to do calculations, like floating point calculations, because there is no such thing in neuromorphic hardware. So it's like the brain. In the brain, we just send spikes. It doesn't matter the amount of energy. We don't, the spiky neurons do not share information or do not transmit information like in an analog way. It's always digital way, or spike or not. Okay, so what is the main difference between these two hardware architectures. So, but this neuromorphic hardware is in the early stage. So there are a lot of new technology coming, but as everything, we need to develop the software, we need to develop the applications. So if we don't have those applications, so obviously we cannot make it popular. And so far we cannot see the advantages or the use, how they can be used in a practical approach. So, but I would say that that is the main difference. I'm not too familiar with the hardware, but with the software, right? So I would say that this is the main difference. Power consumption, the event drive approach, so just switching on and switching off the circuits, and working in parallel, so we can have all the neurons working at the same time, and also the simulation. So 1 second of simulation can represent 1 second of neural activity. So we can study how the brain communicate. How it works is very, very complicated, but at least we can understand how the brain communicate. So yeah, I have no more questions so far. And yeah, so I would continue giving the presentation. So let me share my screen. Okay, so the next topic is about encoding algorithms. Please, if you have any question, so send the question and I will be happy to answer. If you have any doubt or any idea, please share it with us. And yeah, probably all these concepts makes no sense so far. It's a lot of theory. So there are books, there are plenty of papers just regarding this new technology. But yeah, I will be happy if you have any doubt. So the next topic is encoding algorithms. You will see that some architectures of spiky neural networks cannot process raw data as inputs. So in some way, we have to encode raw data, in this case, talking about signals, or even though we are not just talking about signals, but just features represented by continuous number or with numbers already. So there are neural networks that cannot process that information directly. So as I mentioned, spiky neural networks just can't process spikes. So in some way, we have to transform this data into spike trains. I will mention 3 encoding algorithms that we use in one of the architectures that I will present, actually the new cube. The other one is just a way to encode. I mean, the first 3 I will get coming back. So I will present 3 encoding algorithms for temporal data. So the first one is address event representation. Second is Venn-Steiger algorithm, and the third one is step forward. So this will help us to transform signals into sequences of spikes, or calling spike trains. The fourth one, that is receptive fields, will help us to transform real number or a number into sequences of the spike. So then with this approach, we can also work with static data, with data that represents features of some problem. right? Not only signals, but just features. The first one is the address event representation. This is a very simple algorithm. In generally speaking, is we only detect the changes between the changes in the signal at every time step. So let's see that we have. Okay, I will explain the figure on the right. So on the top, you can see a signal in blue, and that signal lasts 30 time units. So what we do with this algorithm is that at every time unit, we detect the change. If the intensity of that signal or in the intensity of that change surpasses a threshold, then we will transform that that signal into spike. So, for example, let's see that we have a value here on the right, like well, it doesn't have any value, but okay, the red dot line. So let's see that that line is at 0. So and let's see that at unit time 1, we have an increment of 1 unit. So if you say that the threshold of that you determine for that algorithm is 0.5, for sure that we are surpassing that threshold. So if it is positive, we will transform that value into 1. So because it went from 0 to 1, and the threshold was 0.5, that is surpassing the threshold. So then we have 1. For the second step on time unit, we have also the same from 1 to 2. So we are having another spike from 2 to 3, another spike from 3 to 4, another spike. Then you see that we can start decreasing the value. We can start decreasing the value of the signal. So also the changes are similar from 4 to 3, from 3 to 2, from 2 to 1, and from 1 to 0. So all of them has the same threshold, that is 0.5. So now we will convert the spikes or the ones into negative ones because the signal is decreasing. So every time we detect a change in the signal and that change surpasses the threshold, we will transform it into positive or negative. Negative if the signal is, if the change is negative. Okay, so as I is described here, it represents significant changes in the signal intensity over a given threshold, where the on and off events are dependent on the sign of the changes. Second, there's a problem with this one. So if the changes of the signal's intensity are huge or vary dramatically, it will not be possible to recover the signal or the original signal using the encoded spectrum generated by this algorithm. So in some way, what it means is that we will lose some information that could be relevant, right? This address event representation algorithm was originally designed for transforming images into spike trains. Yeah, and also there is another problem that if the changes are very, very small, so we will not generate spike, and also we can lose some information. So this is an example. So we have the signal that is normalized. I mean, it's the blue line. This is actually a real signal. It's EEG data. Is one of the channels recorded. I will give an example of this later when I explain the architectures. So yeah, before to put this signal into the neural network, I had to transform it into spike trains. So we see that we have some horizontal lines on the top, we see blue lines, and on the bottom, we see red lines. So the blue ones means that they are positive spikes that are that represent the positive changes in the signal, and also the red ones represents a negative change in the signal. So as you can see, instead of having like 128 points of information, like real numbers, we only need to process few events, either positive or negative. So in some way, we can say that we can compress that information, right? So this is, maybe now we can see a little bit of the advantages of working with spiky neural networks. So instead of processing a big amount of information, okay, they can process a big amount of information, but in a very, very efficient way. Yeah, as also I described, the problem with this kind of algorithm is that reconstructing the signal is quite hard. So the red line, the continuous red line, is a reconstructed signal. So I had the spike train, I also have the threshold, and I try to do the opposite operation. So when I reconstruct, you will see that there are many, well, there are some differences between the original and the reconstructed signal. It's important to mention that that doesn't mean, I mean, if we are losing some information, that doesn't mean that the signal cannot be useful for in the spiky neural network. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter if we can have a good encoding algorithm that doesn't lose information to perform a classification or prediction problem. Here in the address event representation, what matters are the relevant changes. So in some way, what we are going to classify as are the patterns that are formed with that relevant changes. So there are other algorithms that can have more accurate reconstruction of the signal. But again, that doesn't mean that they are the best for performing classification or prediction problems, right? So here the important thing is how to extract the important features of the signals. In this case, the important features are the changes in the signal. The second encoding algorithm that I want, oh, sorry. So also important thing is that we can have positive and negative spikes. So you will see that there are algorithms that process that can create only positive spikes, but this kind of algorithm can process both positive and negative. The second encoding algorithm is the Bent-Spiker algorithm. So this this algorithm is based on the finite impulse response technique. Basically, it is we have a filter that we pass through the, no, we have a signal that we pass through a filter, and then we calculate two errors of that when we are passing that filter through the signal. And these are the questions for the two errors. If the first error is smaller than the second minus a threshold, we have to also define a threshold value. Then we will emit a spike. And after that, we subtract the filter from the input, and that's it. If we don't meet with that condition, so we do nothing. So we just transfer a 0. The complicated thing with the Bent-Spiker algorithm is that we have to define a specific finite impulse response filter for different type of signals. I mean, talking about the order of the filter. So some filters work, in my experience, for working with EEG data. Some of the filters goes from of the order of 20, 21, 22. So, but we have other signals or other signals that can be in order of 10, 12. So, yeah, finding the proper filter of this for the signal to encode the signal could be a problem. Another, I wouldn't say an issue, but another thing that we have to do is that depending on the filter, also we have to define the threshold. So now we have two problems, right? So for every signal, we have to find the order of the filter and also the threshold of that filter. So that means that in some way we have to find the best values of these two variables. However, when we use Band-Spiker algorithm and we want to recover the signal, so the original signal can be recovered easily from the encoded spike train. We only need to do a convolution process. We make a convolution between the spike train and the filter, and we will reconstruct the original signal. And another feature of the Band-Spiker algorithm is that we can just produce positive spikes, I mean excitatory spikes. So the other spike, like positive and negative, can be treated like positive, excitatory and inhibitory spikes. So when we receive an excitatory spike, the postsynaptic neuron can start increasing the voltage. But when we receive a negative or an inhibitory spike, we can make the postsynaptic neuron to decrease the voltage. So in the case of an Spiker algorithm, it will produce only excitatory spikes. So this is the pseudocode of the Band-Spiker algorithm. As you can see, it's quite it's very simple algorithm. So we are just passing the signal through the filter at every time unit. We calculate both errors. Error one, that is the input minus the filter, and error two is just the input. And if that met with the condition that the error one is less than the error two minus the threshold, then we will set a spike. Otherwise, we do nothing. And the result, we can see it on the right side. So we have, again, two signals. The main signal is the blue one, the one that we want to encode into spike trains. After encoding, we just see the vertical lines. That means the spikes. And the red continuous line is the reconstructed signal. So as you can see, the reconstruction is quite accurate. And there are some issues. Some issues are at the beginning and at the end of the signal. So these issues, as you can see, we cannot recover or reconstruct properly the first part of the signal and the end, the last part of the signal. But this is because we are doing the convolution, and it depends on the order of the filter. So, for example, if the order of the filter is 20, so I would say that the 21st point of the signal will not be properly decoded, similar to the end that will not be properly decoded. So, but all the other points in between have a really, really accurate decoding process. On the bottom, I have the filter. The order of this filter is 12. And also, when you are defining a finite impulse response filter, you have to define the cutoff frequency. And the cutoff frequency of this filter is 184 hertz. So using that specific signal with that specific filter, we can have a good encoding algorithm and a good reconstruction. And the third one is a step forward algorithm. This step forward is very, very simple. What we have is just a baseline. We have our original signal. We have a baseline. So the baseline is just a number that we define at the beginning of the algorithm. That baseline can be maybe the average of the signal. So that means that we calculate the average at every time step of the signal, and we can say that okay, this is a threshold, and we define a percentage of that value as our threshold value. So if we have a signal and we have a change, and that change surpasses the threshold, so we will emit a spike, positive or negative, depends on the signal of the sign of the change. This is similar to the first algorithm that I described. However, this threshold is adapted constantly. So, for example, we define a high threshold at the beginning, and we see that the changes between the signals are not that big enough, so the threshold will be modified and will start decreasing. So it's like an adaptive threshold. So maybe it's better if you see the signal, right? So similarly, we have the signal in blue, and we have the encoding signal into spike trains. The blue one indicates the positive spikes. The red one indicates the inhibitory or negative spikes. And well, with every time step, the threshold is changing. As you can see, this codification is, I would say that is much better than the first algorithm, that the address event representation algorithm. When we reconstruct the signal, is more accurate, and also I would say that is an efficient encoding algorithm, because we can't encode 128 time points into very few points. Let's say around 30 points, for example. So if you do this comparison between the address event representation, the step forward, and the Benz spiker, even if it is a good algorithm for reconstructing a signal, so you will see that we have more spikes, right? So in some way we need to process more information. But with the step forward is not the case. We don't need to have much information to detect a pattern. The fourth encoding algorithm. Oh, sorry, just the last thing to mention about these three algorithms is that, as you can see, we can process signals. It's not just the features, as I mentioned at the beginning with for example, considering the example of the IRIS data set, that we have 4 features for every sample. In this case, we can have one sample may contain one or several signals. So that simple sample, I'm talking about temporal samples, we can transform it into several spike trains. So these encoding algorithms are just for temporal information from temporal data, right? For signals. So this fourth encoding algorithm is for transforming a real number into sequences of the spikes, right? So this receptive field approach is a population-based encoding algorithm. It is inspired by the local receptive fields found in biological neurons, actually from the retina. So yeah, the aim of this encoding algorithm is to increase the temporal distances between the temporal input patterns associated with respective input data points. So this is a little bit more complicated to explain. But it is better if I do it, I mean, with the signals. I hope you can see the plots. They are a little bit light. So for this receptive field, we have to define three things. So let's see that we have a real number. In this example, the real number x is equals to 0.75. So the three things that we have to define is, number one, the number of receptive fields so that we want to use. If we have many receptive fields, that means that we can have a more accurate representation. However, we will use more information, right? I mean, we will produce more information, more spikes. So we can do it as precise as we want. The second thing that we have to define is the type of receptive field. In this case, is the Gaussian. In some literature, so they use Gaussian receptive fields. So this is the case in this kind of algorithms. We will use Gaussian receptive fields or Gaussian functions. And one of the properties of that Gaussian function is that we have to define the width of the signal, right? So far we have two things. We have the number of Gaussian receptive fields that we have to define, the width of that receptive field, and also we have to define the duration of the spike train. So if we have a number, we have to transform it into spike train. That spike train has a duration. So in this example, we define the duration of 10 time units, right? So the plot on the top, we have five, actually no, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 6 receptive fields. Okay, everyone is in different color. The amplitude of this Gaussian receptive field is 2, and also I decided to have 10 time units per number. I mean, yeah, my spike train will be the length of my spike train will be 10. Okay. We also have to define I would say the interval of the range of value that we want to encode. In this case, the x number is 0.75. I just decided to have an encoding from -2 to 2. So the Gaussian function goes from -2 to 2. Okay. What we are going to do is to detect the intersection where the number that we want to encode into spike trains intersect all the Gaussian functions. So in the figure on the top, so the blue line, the vertical blue line, represents that number, 0.75. The stars and that intersects the Gaussian curves will define the times. Also, on the right side of the figure, you have the numbers from 0 to 10. That represents the time, the duration of our spike train. So now you can see that the stars, the red stars on the first plot, has some numbers. The first one from top to bottom is 6.82. The second is 5. Well, the first one is 6.82, and it intersects with the fourth Gaussian function. The second intersection is in the fifth Gaussian function when the value is 5.31. Okay, and also the intersection with the remaining Gaussian functions is very close to 0. So when we transform these intersections into spike trains, we will see the second plot. In the second plot, I said, so for the first Gaussian receptive field, that is the first one on the left in blue dot line, is at time 10. So it will last at the end. So we will have a spike at the end because it's the less relevant. There is not much information there. So as you can see, if we follow the trace of this first receptive field, is when we intersect with the number is 0, 0, and that represents time 10. So the same happened with the second receptive field. The intersection is at 0. The third Gaussian field, receptive field, is also the intersection is at time 10. So, but for the fourth is at time 6. Oh no, the value 6, that is in the graph represents time 3. And for the fifth one represents at time 5. And the last receptive field intersects at time 10. So these are, the second plot represents the time where we have the intersections. And finally, the last plot on the bottom is the number of the spikes. I mean, is the spike train. So we have a spike at time 3. I have another spike at time 5. And we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 spikes at time 10. Okay, so this is the way we encode a static number. Just a real number is 2 sequences of spikes. So for example, if we are dealing with the IRIS data set that has, every sample has 4 values, so we can have, for every sample, we can have 4 spike trains. What we can do, we can split, have the 4 spike trains, or also we can concatenate the spike trains into only one sequence and start performing some classification problem, or starting to stimulating a spiking neuron. Okay, so this is important to remember that there are some encoding algorithms that are useful for encoding signals into spike trains, and there are also other algorithms for encoding real numbers into spike trains. Remember that we have to transform this information even to make understandable to the spiking neurons. Spiking neurons only process temporal data in form of events or spikes. Okay, so in the institute at KEDRI, one of our research visitors developed a tool to encode this signal, to encode signals into spike trains. The name of this tool is Spiker. Actually, there is a publication, a paper publication. The name of the paper is Selection and Optimization of Temporal Spike Encoding Methods for Spiking Neural Networks. It was published actually this year, at the beginning of this year. And yes, there you will find a more detailed comparison between all the algorithms that I already described, only those ones that process signals. And also it gives the recommendations on how to optimize the values, for example, talking about the threshold values, or in the case of the Ben-Spiker algorithm, how to find the proper filter, the proper order of the filter, and the proper threshold of the Ben-Spiker algorithm. So the Spiker can be downloaded for free in the KEDRI's web page. So yeah, you go to KEDRI web page at this this link, and on the bottom of that page, you will find the spiker. You can download it. It's a MATLAB program. So if you don't have MATLAB, you download this program, the spiker, and it will install the runtime so you can run it. Okay, I will share my screen also because I want to do some examples with you on how to use this spiker algorithm. But I think I will need to share the screen. So sorry, Roberto, can you help me with this? I'm not sure if I am sharing the spiker window or is just sharing the
no, still not. You are sharing the website
presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay, I will share now the spiker. Well, I already downloaded the spiker. Okay, but I will. Okay. And what about now?
Okay.
You can see it.
Now it's present.
Okay, great.
The window.
Yeah, the spiker window. Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, I already downloaded the spiker software program, and I will show how to use this tool. And also, I have to describe maybe my data. So, okay. So this is one example of a temporal sample. This sample represents EEG signal, electroencephalography signals. In this case, we have 14 channels, 14 electrodes. Every column represents one electrode. So, and every row represents the value of that signal at every time step. So this signal was a sample at 128 hertz. So this sample has 128 points. Okay, so what I'm going to do with the spiker is I will take the first EEG channel, the first signal, and I will encode it into spike trains using these different encoding algorithms. Yeah, so the first thing that we need to do is to select our data. So we go to the menu, go to data, then load data. And oh, let me check. Okay, here I have all these samples. I have 60 samples. I will select the one that I already showed you, sample 1. Okay, the format of these samples is comma-separated files, CSV files. So yeah, we will use these samples also for when I am showing the two architectures using the single neuron and the NeoQ. Okay, we selected by default, and okay, here's the signal. No, you can see the signal, the raw signal, and now we have on the right we have 4 different algorithms. We have the threshold-based. The threshold-based algorithm is similar to the address event representation. It has a small variation, but practically is the same. We detect big changes in the signal. So we also have the step forward. We have the moving window. I didn't describe the moving window. but you can find the description of the moving window in the paper that I already mentioned related to Spiker. I just want to make a comparison about all these signals, all these encoding algorithms. And at the end, we have the Benz Spiker algorithm. So we have the algorithm, and also we have the parameters that we have to define for each of the algorithms. So I will start with the threshold-based representation algorithm. So we select it, and on the right, we have a threshold. So by default, we have 1.5. Let's see what happens when we encode the signal, and that's it. So we have the original signal, we have the decoded signal, and we have the spike train produced after encoding the signal. So as you can see, the threshold 1.5 is not a good one, I would say. So you can see the difference between the original and the decoded signal